Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Gateway House Meghnad Desai Academy of Economics webcast. This evening, we have with us Lord Meghnad Desai, who is going to be speaking on identity politics versus economic justice. We did have Dr. Huri Islamalu, but she has lost her voice as of this morning and is unable to speak. So she will be on the call, but unable to speak. She will now be a participant. So Lord Desai, you're carrying the evening for both you and Dr. Huri. So welcome. And we're going to get to this right away. The way the format will work is I will be in conversation with Lord Desai for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A. Please type in your questions into the chat area, and I will be sure to take it up one by one. We have a US election coming up. The nomination of Kamala Harris as the Vice President for the presidential candidate Joe Biden has brought into sharp focus the issue of radical identity politics in the US and around the world. It could propel her to the White House, but there are some experts who question whether it will address the issue that really confronts people across the world today, and that is inequality. Coronavirus has simply exacerbated this inequality, and it has also simultaneously upended globalisation, which has been the prominent economics on which the world has run till March this year. The result could be a tug-of-war between identity politics and the powerful corporations, both of which are playing to win in the upcoming US elections. So, Lord Desai, it's inequality, it's not identity politics. That is the core global issue today. Then why has identity politics come back to mainstream discussion in the US? And does it really have any traction?
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Let me first say that I send my sympathies to Huri, who has lost her voice. And so we all wish her to get well very soon. Well, first of all, let me say that to some extent, inequality and identity politics have, as it were, cross-correlated. Because identity politics, in my view, was something that the liberals adopted early on, basically emphasizing race, ethnicity, gender, all those things, all very well worth emphasizing. But at least the left, the liberal left, on which I have been all my life, basically did not face up to inequality toughly. So they created these sorts of little, what we call from Indian point of view, reservations. Yes, if you're such, we will give you slight more consideration. We will not use the N word in America. I mean, you go listen to Martin Luther King speeches, and he uses the N word all the time. What's the problem? But that saves you from doing the tough things about income inequality, social inequality, discrimination. So no, you're very lovely. I'm going to address you correctly as Afro-American or Black American. I'm not going to forget about all that. Where's my bread? Okay, so in a sense, the right wing has taken up identity politics in a much more aggressive way. I mean, what's Trump all about? Trump basically gathered together the manufacturing employees who were deprived of a living when industry moved from US to Asia. They were living deprived lives in the Midwest, and nobody was looking after them. They were white, they had families and all that. They were promised a prosperous livelihood by just working manually across Western Europe and America. Suddenly, whoosh, the industry went, the capitalists gained because they can make money from UK or US or China. But the people who were left behind didn't even have any kind of identity card to play. You can't say, oh, you're a poor white man. Nobody. So Trump organized them, saying you are the deprived. America is no longer great because you have to be. So in a sense, identity politics has now become as much a platform for, as it were, the elite community as it has become as it was for. Now, I think the paradox is this. When the Great Recession happened, it happened because lots of people who had enriched themselves in financial markets misbehaved and the whole thing crashed. But in
Right.
getting out of it, central banks spent lots and lots of money, quantitative easing, and that made the rich richer because they had assets to sell to the central bank. They got money. They uh, invested the assets in something else. So while inequality had been rising, in the last 12 years, it has been almost scandalously rising very, very high. And no political party, no political philosophy has seriously tackled. People thought we should have a global income tax. You can't have global income tax. The rich are not stupid. They long ago made arrangements to thwart that. So I think we need to understand not just identity, we need to understand class, the old fashioned sense. It's not the persons who are deprived by being ethnically whatever, but who are deprived by being short of wealth or with low incomes, with low educational opportunities for the children. And we need to get economics back into inequality, and economics back into identity politics, and understand that the world is not going to wait very long for us just doing our fashionable things of using the correct language. That is, language is not enough.
So the time has come for the really hard work to be done. And in India, just moving from the US to India, Indian politics still uses identity for social, political, and economic mobilization. Is it on the wane here as technology and economics sort of transcends caste, or is it still too useful a tool for politics? Is India still confused over its national identity as you had observed 20 years ago?
India is in many sense very interesting, complex issue because historically, Hindu society has given everybody a separate identity. I mean, it is actually the perfect sort of honeycombed concept in which everybody has their little hole in which you are there, and you look around you, who is below me, who is above me, but I'm not going to leave my little hole. So the way Indian democracy strengthened itself and sort of tackled inequality through the Mandal report and so on is strengthen the hierarchical identity society and let politics exploit that. I mean, the biggest event since the Congress lost its natural majority in 1989. Between 1989 and now, the biggest thing has been the rise of the OBCs.
Yes.
The fact that OBCs are prominent in politics entirely because of that. Now, what is interesting in this, I find, is that this has been perfectly adapted both by either a liberal left and so on, and by the Hindu nationalists. I mean, nobody is at all uncomfortable. I mean, you can simultaneously have a unifying concept of Hindu nationalism and embrace caste divisions. So, but there's a tension there. And that tension will come out one of these days because already about Dalits, it's getting rather uneasy about their condition. So I think India, of course, is a miracle that it is a successful democracy. I mean, we must always remember that. But it has had to play uh, the lack of really fast growth, real growth in eliminating poverty and so on. So it has used identity politics as a SOP, as a kind of side payment to people. I mean, when in the last budget of the Modi 1.0, the economically weaker uh, sort of groups were invented for reservations. That was an admission that a lot of people were not caught by Mandal, and they have to be also compensated for. So Indian politics works by managing these things, uh, different parties do it differently, but nobody can neglect caste identity, jati identity, religious identity, but they all have to be catered for.
So
It's
going
very
back,
fragile balance.
it is.
Sorry.
Going back to the US elections, you
Yeah.
have Kamala Harris, who's made it all about race and rather about inequality. But surely that has already been taken, been played out with Martin Luther King and the Baptist Church, and all that has already been played out. So why bring it back? Is that the only way they can really win power, or are they missing something here?
No, you see, for me, it's very interesting because looking at US politics, we have to go back to Barack Obama's election. You see, US is actually, there may be a secular state, but it is a white Christian majoritarian democracy. You know, every president has taken oath on the Bible and has been a man, uh, and only Obama has been non-white. He's actually mixed race because his mother was white and his father was Kenyan African. Um, but so the two things happened. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson got the Civil Rights Act passed, and for the first time enfranchised the black people. And suddenly the Republican Party panicked, and they had become extremely interested in blocking black people from voting in different states and so on. That's one thing. And secondly, Obama, Tea Party movement, and Trump is a progression of the white majoritarian panic that they are going to be no longer a majority community, no longer to be naturally in power. So race or color, whatever you call it, has become a weapon on both sides. Uh, I mean, yes, Black Lives Matter has made a lot of impact this year than it did when it started 2-3 years ago. And Kamala Harris is, in a sense, an ambiguous person there because she's not Black American.
Right.
And no, people look at the authenticity very, very carefully. And so hopefully she will, she may get elected. I have my reservations about who's going to get elected. But on the black side, she's being criticized as not authentic enough.
Right.
Other people say, well, she's too posh. But I think she's very clever and she has played her cards right. And I think to a certain extent, it's a concession to the white prejudice. No, she's not actually black, but she's all right. She's Asian and, kind of, respectable, both parents, very good academic sort of qualifications. I knew both of them, so I can tell you that they really both fantastic people. I knew Kamala Harris when she was 1 year old. But, so she has that sort of middle class qualification. So she's very well chosen as a, she doesn't fly in the face of the people who don't like black people. Let's put it that way. So
Right.
she could be president because the prospect of Biden, if he wins, lasting 4 years are very slim. Sorry, I mean, it's a question of health. It's not a question of anything else. So she could become president.
Right.
So,
And
but we will see.
That's an interesting way of also explaining Kamala Harris. We had
She's a time brand, for God's sake.
Yes, that's right.
She's not at all deprived. She's time brand.
So she's an ex-colonial, really, more than anything else. That's a very familiar person, English-speaking ex-colonial from both sides. Just to move on a little bit, let's talk about what the coronavirus has changed. That the local political entities, which are now going to be more radicalized socially and regionally and demanding, versus the tug of war between the globalization, the big global actors, the corporations, the financial institutions, etc. Is that tug of war going to start playing out in these politics? And will the grassroots politicians like, Mr. Modi, Mr. Erdogan in Turkey, etc., what is going to happen to them?
Well,
Are they going to be able to survive this?
Well, this is a very complex, this is about 25 questions in one, and very good for that. Uh, First of all, globalization, we forget how recent globalization is. In 1970s, there was no globalization. Globalization happened in the wake of the oil shock and of the dollar devaluation. And then there was the container ship and the ComSat, which made both transport and communication easier. And then people forget, this generation forgets how bad telephones used to be compared to now. So that created the possibility of just-in-time inventories and global supply chains and all that. It has only been there for about 40 years. And that era is over technologically because un, unblocked transportation between borders is going to be very difficult post-COVID. Uh, and people will have to rethink the supply chain technology and making it much more local as it used to be. I mean, in old days, when you made a car, you made all the parts in the same location in
That's
Detroit.
right.
Not like now, it's all scattered all over, and then you join it together. You will have, and so we will be using much more robotics. We're not going to use humans because in humans get infected. Robots don't get infected. And so we will have a very different kind of technology. And the kind of globalization we mean by the technological globalization is over or will be over very soon. We will not reconstruct that. Because another thing that COVID has taught us is proximity is a diseconomy. If you pack people inside a factory, humans, that is a no-no now. So you'll have to rethink how factories are built. Agriculture did not suffer from COVID as manufacturing did. Why? Because agriculture, there is no crowding. You have a person on a tractor and maybe at harvest time 5 people, but you don't have that sort of closed in thing. Similarly in consumption, pubs and restaurants and theaters will have to be rethought because proximity is a diseconomy, which we never thought about. In economics, we have never thought about proximity being a problem, but proximity is a cost in both production and in consumption. So how do we rebuild? So economy will, and I think from that point of view, there's going to be huge churning of the economics and basically how different countries deal with economics. Quite a lot of people have become very nostalgic about globalization, not realizing that 30 years ago, they were dead against it. I mean,
Right.
I remember, trying to, in 1999, when the WTO had a meeting in Seattle, Washington, there were huge demonstrations by American trade unions saying, this is terrible, we
Yeah.
don't like globalization, taking our jobs away. It was taking jobs away, but it was taking jobs for the benefit of American businessmen. So anyway, so I think we haven't really even figured out conceptually what kind of new technology will emerge, how will different nations respond to it. A lot of people are thinking if China becomes a no-no, then we will all benefit. But China is not going to be that easy to defeat because lots of countries are not going to boycott China. Lots of countries in Asia are not going to boycott China. The West may, but the East won't. And I think we will have a very interesting new technological regime and trade regime, which will which politicians will have to respond to. Well, Modi is very interesting that at least in his Modi 1.0, he was a globalizer and a nationalist. His whole thing was sabka saath, sabka vikas, i.e., let's get India developed to its full potential, and we'll all benefit, and then we will sort out the internal identity problem. He also, now, in Modi too, there's been all sorts of problems, so we don't know where we are going. But that's on another day. So I think on one hand, people are saying this morning in the FT, there's an article saying migration will stop so much that immigration will cease to be a topic the right wing can exploit. There will not be that much people. And if immigration is not a topic, then in Europe and in America, the right wing will lose a big weapon because they are basically against immigrants. And so we may have, like our identity politics, we may have a whole new churning again if people don't travel very much and migrate and go across. Of course, the poorer countries will lose out because their citizens can't migrate. But the rich will be less threatened by these migrants coming in and doing this and that. I mean, the whole thing about remittances being so important in lots of poor countries, it will turn out that remittances will decline quite highly, and how India will cope with no Gulf countries to migrate to. That will be very interesting thing to and that should be thought about now before it
Right.
hits us.
So I'm sorry,
Now
but
you're
there's
going all dark.
yeah, I've gone dark because there's no electricity in my home, but the
That's
Wi-Fi
all
is
right.
working, so that's good.
That's all right.
But so this then brings us back, Lord Desai, to the question of identity politics. If people are not going to have jobs, then how are they going to be able to be represented economically? What are the politicians going to do with all these people who need to earn livelihoods? And if proximity is a diseconomy?
But I have said this about Indian economic planning, so I'm getting repetitive. The biggest mistake India made in all its planning from 1947 onwards to now is neglect its labor as an economic force.
Yeah.
It kept them idle, unemployed, surplus labor. And while labor should have been, we should have designed our economic framework to use cheap labor as a strength of the economy. We could have built a huge manufacturing industry, but we went in for making machines, making machines, because we were all going to be Soviet Union or some classy Western capital-intensive industry. All this, I lived through that madness. You could not discuss economics with any of these people without discussing the Soviet Union's policy. I mean, we were all going to be Soviet Union, and we were utterly failed. I mean, what happened during the pandemic? You had 100 million people wandering around the streets of India, walking in a pathetic way because they could not be where they had gone to if they were unemployed. They had no other sort of asset. So I think they will have to think of development which will absorb and use and reward labor as and where it is to be found, rather than make people go miles walking to Delhi or Agra, wherever it is. And if people go there, they have to build a good working class housing for them, things like that. You have put all the costs of adjustment on the worker, who is the weakest link in the chain. And I think we have to learn that for any politician, the first thing to learn is look after the 500 to 700 million workers. Don't treat them badly. And that is your only economic strength you have. And I think we really have to rethink that part of our economics. We have raised the cost of labor by all these labor laws. Luckily, this government is reforming them. But we made labor the most expensive thing for manufacturing industry. The manufacturing industry is such a small sector of the whole economy. So, labor intensive but productive technologies will have to be hired, and we'll have to really think after. For example, India has the lowest labor force participation rate of women of any country.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. That's a waste of resource. Of course, those women work very hard inside their home, but they're not rewarded for this.
Part of the
How do we rethink that in an economically productive way is going to be a big challenge.
And that's where China scores.
Yes. So the Chinese have always used it's almost, okay, this is slightly a caricature. It's almost this way the way women dress. Are they dressed in trousers? So you can work in trousers very flexibly, or you have, hijabs and saris and all this, which are kind of, okay, women do work with all those things. But it's really the way you harness people to do the things and you educate them. I mean, after all these years, women's illiteracy is still a problem in India.
Hmm.
You
So
know,
it's
I
getting
mean,
good, it's improving.
and it is just a great shame that we don't get up to even that. And so anyway, I think
Well,
at least this will force people to think about uh, work
um,
for everybody.
so this, I'm going to ask you one last question before we open it up to the audience. You are in London, and it is your other home or your main home. How do you see this playing out in the UK and in Europe? This issue of identity politics versus inequality,
Well, Brexit happened because of identity politics,
right?
because they didn't like migrants. The British were tolerated Western European migrants, but when it came to Eastern European migrants, they said this is too much. The Hungarian, the Romanians and the Bulgarians, and they kind of
Mm.
threw up. And Brexit was basically a immigration uh, sort of run protest.
Correct.
It's not going to be very rewarding for Britain to have gone out, but the effect of that is going to be mixed up with the effect of the COVID. So nobody will be able to separate out how much damage is done by Brexit and how much damage is done by COVID. But so I mean, we had that, but very recently, in the last year or so, as I was saying before, the right wing is losing immigration as a thing on which they can organize because immigration has stopped. I mean, it really seriously stopped. In Germany, the right wing parties, the extreme right wing parties are losing out very much. So did it in Austria very recently. So it may be that if COVID makes us all stay at home, as it were, and
Yes.
organize on our domestic pitch, it will strengthen the nation state, uh, but it will
Interesting.
weaken globalization.
Hmm. And is that a good outcome?
It may be. Not every globalization is good. Not every national sort of thing is bad. I mean, after all, half of my life I was in a single nation state dominated, okay, interconnected, but not globalized.
Right.
Globalization happened in the middle of my 50s.
Yes.
Uh, so I've lived with both, but I think of both as transitional phases. Nothing is there forever.
Uh, a couple of questions. There is, given just on the same line of the identity politics, there's been a rise of conservative politics, right-wing politics around the world. Why is that in particular? Why is the
No,
left not able to
actually,
hold the
actually,
line?
this is a fallacy of thinking. Left-wing politics has never been dominant in my lifetime. Never
Always
ever.
marginal?
In UK, in the 55 years I've lived here, the majority of the time it has been a conservative government. Right? I mean, as a Labour Party member, I'm used to being defeated in election time after time, and I have more experience of losing and winning. If you look at American history post-war, Republicans have been more often in power than Democrats. It's because
Right.
Democrats and socialists are very fashionable with the newspapers and the writers, so they get
Mm.
celebrated more. But the right has never given up real power. They certainly have not given up economic power. There's been, as we discussed, inequality.
Yes.
No left-wing government has been able to make a dent on inequality in the years since the war ended, Second World War ended. Why? Because the substantial political power and the economic things have been with the right, and progressive income tax has been modified to so that it's all very progressive to cut income tax, Laffer's curve and all that. And everywhere income tax is cut. And everybody thinks that's great, that's prosperity. So I think it's not the right wing has certainly come up, but with the social media and all that, our awareness is global now. And it is one, we now worry about Trump being president. But, remember when Reagan became president, it was a huge shock to the system, at least in America, that
Yes.
this second-rate actor had become president and he was going to start a Star Wars kind of, defense budget and so on. What will happen to the
Right.
world? I mean, again, so I think what is true is that the right wing used to be somewhat snooty about the popular vote, but they have learned. They are no longer just after the elite. They know how to grab mass power, mass following, and no longer expecting deference from the lower classes, but pandering to them in the ways in which they will go. I
Right.
mean, in 1983 election, more unemployed voted for Mrs. Thatcher than for the Labour Party.
Right.
That tells you how powerful the right wing can be. Anyway, so
I'm
that
sorry, I'm trying to
was
just
fine.
get some light. Sorry. Is this better? Can you see me now?
Yeah, I can
That's
see you
good.
now. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. 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 And a last question is that we have Dave Vilapati from the US who says that Trump has learned how to divide the country between urban, suburban, and rural America, and he now has over 90% support from rural America. So it looks like, how do you see a Trump presidency being re-elected? What happens to the issues of identity politics, or Biden, or is it really 6 of one and half a dozen of the other?
No, I think let me put it this way. I'm not at all sanguine about Biden winning. First of all, let me say that. I think unless he's a high double-digit lead, that's not a lead. A lead of 8% or 10% is not a lead for Biden. This is really, and people lie to pollsters nowadays.
Yes.
I think my one prediction is that on the night of 3rd of November, early morning of 4th of November, the election will not be decided. The election will be decided on the 6th of January, when the Congress meets after all the battles and quarrels about electoral college votes and this and that. The presidency will be determined in January 6th. And uncertainty, both socially and as it were, streetwise, in America between those two dates is going to be horrible. I hope I'm wrong, but there are people waiting to go to war with each other right now.
Yes.
Seriously. And so, if Trump is losing, he will not concede. Normally, every losing candidate concedes. Bush did not in the 2000 election between Bush and Gore. There was a problem, but
Right.
then Gore finally conceded later on. But Trump will not concede on the night, and he will fight fake votes, this and that, and they have got the legal teams ready in every state where they want to fight. So I think this is going to take a bit of time. American way of electing president is so antediluvian. It's positively medieval. And there is not one election commission. There are 50 election commissions, one in each state. And each state can decide obstacles to voting. So we will all have a good tutorial in how America elects the president. So that is one. And as I said, I hope I'm wrong. But to answer your question, I think it's not going to be easy for either person because Biden has been very, very cautious in not being radical in his program. And unless the Democrats win both houses, there's going to be a stalemate, especially if they don't win the Senate. there's going to be stalemate. And so he will not be able to get very much done. But let's hope that after COVID, a bit of prosperity returns. And, that sort of calms everybody down. But there's no
Yes.
certainty of that.
Well, that is a very pensive note on which to end our webcast. Thank you so much, Lord
I
Desai.
believe in leaving people troubled, not happy.
That is an economist speaking.
Exactly.
So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it. We hope that you will come back post-election and we can have this discussion maybe a month and a half from now to see what really won. Was it the inequality or the identity politics, or did both lose?
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Lord Desai. We wish you a very good evening, and thank you all very much for being part of this. This is all going to be available on both our websites of the Meghnad Desai Academy and of Gateway House. You can look for it next week. Thank you very much. And
thank you very much. Great pleasure. Thank